And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted. And thanks very much, Pramod Gosavi. Thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks a lot. Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, happy Valentine's. And I was just about to tell you before we jumped on this how much I love your social presence on LinkedIn specifically and how insightful your posts are. And you have a tremendous group of followers. And I'm very happy that you took some time of your busy schedule and to have a conversation because I find as much as these posts are insightful, I think that we're going to elevate the conversation to a whole different level by having this discussion. Why don't we warm up? It's early in your day. Warm up by maybe a discussion of your background. Walk me through memory lane, how you started and how you got to where you are today as an investor.
Yeah, so I started as an engineer when I was a kid. I actually liked building electronic circuits. So I used to build like amplifiers and I also like to build remote controls and others. So that's how I got into engineering. And then my family, my brother and father, both mechanical engineers, they were building stuff. Uh, so that's how I grew up loving products, engineering. Initially, I actually enrolled in a mechanical engineering program, but later on I moved to double E. So I graduated from IIT Bombay. I came here to do my PhD, but instead I graduated with a master's because the opportunity I was getting, so I was going to be one of the first few hires on a brand new product at Sun Microsystems. So they're building a new enterprise class product, and that was a great opportunity. So that's how I started my career. So I did engineering for about 10 years, really loved 0 to 1. Like I really like figuring out where the risk is, where the complexity is, reducing it, and then taking it to I work in two startups after Sun Microsystems, and I was really amazed like how good the venture system is out in California, particularly. You have an entrepreneur that has a really bold idea, a very disruptive idea, and people just want to fund it, like people want to fund risk. But one of the things that I thought was lacking was really very much of a hands-on support. So at that time, the venture industry was still very old school, where you just handed money and then the entrepreneur went and worked on it. I thought we should have gotten more sort of a hands-on help, maybe like a month to month, like a quarter to quarter help. And that started me thinking that, hey, I love building products. If I was not doing what I was doing right now, I would be working in startups, same thing, building like 0 to 1 products. Maybe if I go on the venture side, I can help a lot more entrepreneurs and founders being on the venture side. And also it helped me ride multiple technology waves. So in the Valley, multiple waves like cloud, mobile. There was previous AI, then there's new AI, and there was a SaaS wave in between. Yeah, so after two gigs in startups, I did my MBA. I jumped into first corporate venture capital, so I spent about 6 years at VMware. I had a fun job there because I was looking out for everything net new and growth opportunities for VMware. So, like, I really didn't have a charter every year. I would pick my own projects. I would work on those and then bring back to the management. So we ended up making 2025 investments all in net new areas. A lot of them we didn't disclose it, but it was a fun job. And then after that, I wanted to get a taste of more institutional venture capital. So I joined this firm in 2020. It's been a fun ride. And one other thing I think you mentioned about social media, I think one other thing that I realized that when you're not a part of a big organization, like I was part of VMware, you have to build your own brand, like people need to see you as you. And that's one of the things that I've done in the last 2, 3 years is to really build that brand and that what I would say as a camaraderie, actually, just helping out people, making those connections, helping people like make connections between themselves. And that is something I now feel that I should have done earlier in my career. And I encourage everybody to have a brand of your own, do something outside the company, because once you're out of the company, you're yourself, and then you need to have an identity. Yeah.
Pramod, like I'm trying to keep my thoughts straight. I, I think that we can go on tangents of all the stuff that you talked about for probably the next 45 minutes easily. And I have so much. We'll probably have to do another session. I know this already. So if you don't mind, let me just, go through some of the stuff that you spoke, because again, I have so many questions. So first and foremost, you glance over the fact that you grew up in a very STEM oriented household, that your family were mechanical engineers. You grew up taking things apart and putting them together, and then you started with one engineering degree, then you converted into another discipline. Just tell me about what it is specifically in taking things apart in that engineering background, because again, not everybody's exposed to it. To people that are potentially listening to this and say, listen, this is awesome, having that baseline of being able to understand how things operate,
Yeah.
and then you apply that to from the physical world, that mindset, you apply that to the intangible, like the software world. So to walk to me just about
Yeah.
that environment that you grew up in.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So my father actually used to have a mechanical engineering workshop. He used to make windows and doors. So you think of a window like it's a particular architecture, particular design, and we used to say that, hey, the customer say, you come up with any design and we'll make it. So one of the challenges there was really feasibility. If you have like very complex design, and that's where actually my brother and me were like really good at is. So our whole philosophy is first build it like simple version of it and then keep on improving it. And that is something that I follow very religiously is don't shoot for the moon, go in increments, like 2 or 3 increments, but first figure out like what's the long pole, like what's the hardest thing in this particular project, if it's some kind of a very critical design, or so first build that first and then build everything around it. So that kind of philosophy stuck to me, is that whenever I look at a project or a product, I look at what's the long pole, like what's the risk in this? Are we working on the highest risk? To just give you an example, when I joined Sun Microsystems, I was working on a project and everybody was assigned sort of work to do. And I always kept on thinking that are people working on the highest priority? Because what if some guy is very smart, works on something and some other guy just messes it up, and then overall the performance is lower, and then you have this lot of high quality work that goes wasted. How can we all like elevate where we improve the baseline, and also both in terms of sort of schedule and quality, get the best schedule and quality out. So then very early on, instead of doing my own hands-on work, I started doing product management, project management, where I would go and figure out this is the most critical. And I'll also, every week, my goal was like, what are the most challenging problems on this project? Like, how can we make sure that we are solving those and not just building for the heck of building? So that sort of always stayed with me. And I think I give credit to my father and brother, who's they're a hardcore mechanical engineer. And that is also one thing that one of the reason I got into mechanical engineering was actually I like building product, like physical products. Like now it's like more software-ish. So, but I think to answer your question, how do I bring it back to software, right? So I'm very visual person. Like every time I work with founders, I always tell them to visualize, create building blocks of your architecture, how the data flows. So I like to see that, and also feel like it's very powerful to just lay it out there in a very graphical sense. And that is something that I really insist on founders, is just don't be abstract, don't write words, just start drawing the components of your product.
And it's more of an aptitude, a mindset of an engineer. You it's something you grew up and you absorb that, and then you almost apply this to everyday life. It's some physicists, they always apply whatever they learn to everyday life. How do we, in today's environment where people are less and less exposed to physical stuff, you look at the young generation, how often do they get to put stuff together and take it apart? People used to fix their own bikes, or they used to fix their own cars, and then the younger generation will come in and maybe do almost like a shadow apprentice. But you don't have that today. Pramod, how do you? And this is an amazing skill set. It really is, because it took you in your life journey into a great, phenomenal success story by just being able to have this building block of a mindset and aptitude. What would you recommend for someone today, either younger generation or people that want to get this form of aptitude, aside from maybe like joining into a full 4-year engineering? Because even then, I have to tell you, it's either you have your own self-learning when you grow up and you continuously learn it, because it doesn't matter if you take a 4-year degree and you still stop and you don't have the capacity to learn, you may not be as capable. So what's your recommendation for somebody who wants to get that skill set?
Yes, I'm a big believer. That's one of my favorite questions to ask people is hobbies. So I think everybody should have hobbies, and one of the hobbies could be around building or doing something. So it could be like, I think with boys, at least, I think you should be able to do something on your own. For example, you could be interested in working on your own cars. You could start with initially maybe like changing oil filter, or like this, like a small thing, or you could take up some backyard projects like building a bench or gardening. Then you can like move on to do other things. Or if you're into fine arts, you can also like work on fine arts, do something. Like, I'm a big believer, I think everybody should have hobbies, and also like active hobbies. It's not, hey, I used to do this in high school. I don't do that anymore, but you continue doing it through your life, and you get more sort of education. You also network with other people with similar sort of hobbies. So with me, I think I've been doing like multiple different things. Like, I used to build like backyard projects. Like, I actually built a whole deck in my backyard, and my daughter was helping me. That's like a bit of a
Pramod, that's amazing. And again, there's a lot to it. It's not just building the deck. You have to take measurements. It's people don't understand. You see somebody who's an expert has done it, but there's a lot to it. And just being able to do that on your own, and then I'm sure it took you probably 3x or 4x or 5x time, but the whole experience of doing that is priceless.
Yeah, and also use this whole sort of make it simple and easy. We had a very complicated like a wraparound deck, and I'm just like, this is stupid. Let's simplify it, make it smaller and simple. And that sort of helps me everyday life. Is just, I think you need to make things simple and repeatable, because I think the joy is in like building and getting to the outcome. You don't need to complicate your life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then let me double click on this Sun Microsystem, right? So you joined fairly like in the early days, right? So the company was, first of all, it was an amazing company, right? For those who are not familiar so much today, there's a generation who didn't grow up with the Sun Microsystems, but it was light years away in terms of the operating system, in terms of capabilities and so on. Talk to me about the early days of having that experience joining a company. First of all, how did you know, or did you, that it was going to be a successful company? And how did you end up in, again, you put yourself, timing is circumstance, right? You ended up in Silicon Valley, and you end up with a very successful company, like an icon of the building blocks of computing. And I don't know if it was a circumstance or luck or combination of thereof that you position yourself. Talk to me about that experience of joining that company.
Yeah, so I think the way I ended up joining Sun Microsystems is my roommate, he was graduating early. He interviewed, and his manager said, "Hey, do you know any other smart guys in Purdue?" And then he suggested my name. I actually didn't prepare for the interview at all. Like I flew out here, but I'll probably say that's one of the best interview experience I had in my whole career. And that is also something I think people don't take it very seriously. So I was interviewed by about 5 to 6 very senior people, like, and one of the guy actually took me out for lunch. And the funny thing is, I interviewed with Sun and as well as Intel, and the difference that you could see very stark. Intel was very tactical. Okay, we are designing this circuit, like how would you do it? But Sun was like really high level at a physics level. They would give me some abstract problem and have me just solve it. None of them were like really, there was no definitive answer, but also very difficult. And the whole day I just sat there and as a student solved it. And they really like that sort of academic, non-choking attitude. And then at the end of the day, they ended up giving me an offer. So it was both good and bad. Sun at that time was very much a meritocracy where, you were smart. And I saw that in the first 5, 6 years of my career. I was one of the new college graduates, and then I used to propose things, and they would actually I'll go all the way to director and say, hey, we should do this and do that. So I think that was my formative days, and I really value that. And also we were building a product from 0 to 1, and it was just full freedom. You can do anything that you want to do. So it's both good and bad that Sun as a company did not do well because of taking too much risk. But for me, starting my career, I think that was a very good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And you exposed yourself to project management, working with other people, being exposed to different areas within the business. And again, the engineering background, even though you weren't per se using it on a day-to-day basis, just straight on, like you weren't designing products, but you were using your extensive background to be successful in that role. And then you joined VMware, which is another brand name icon. Again, you can glance over that as well. It was also meteoric success stories in the Silicon Valley, like the VMware took off and the success of virtualization and all of that. Talk to me about that story, about how you joined them, and then, specifically what are the lessons learned from, now you had experience 10 years in Sun Microsystems, now you with the VMware.
Yeah.
What you were exposed there. And you were a very different level now because you came in not as a junior new graduate, but a very different level.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way I got in touch with VMware was before VMware, I was at a company called Seagate, and I was spending a lot of time on cloud. Cloud was coming up at that time. So I was searching the cloud giants like VMware, Microsoft, Google. And then when VMware was looking to hire, so they were hiring the first hire on the corporate venture capital team. So they wanted a very good mix of technology, business, and hustle. So those are the 3 things that they were looking for. And funny thing enough is I was the first one to get into that interview process. And then they interviewed a lot of folks from McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and others. So one of the reason that they like me is we were similar to Sun, is a very much of a technology engineering culture. And also it's a very much very humble culture. And they value people learning technology a lot. So, a lot of people who interviewed at VMware used to get frustrated because everyone, no matter where they worked, you're supposed to know what virtualization is, right? If you can't talk about virtualization, they would not hire you. And there have been people so frustrated. They are like, hey, look, I am doing partnerships or I'm doing finance. Why do I need to know about virtualization? But that is something that, that was a culture that you should know about the products, and also you should love the products. So one of the things that worked for me in the interview process, and I I advise a lot of my friends, like when they're going through the interview process. So I always say that you need to take a half a step towards where you're going. So half a step is, okay, you're joining a virtualization company, you at least learn what virtualization is, you look at their products, you have a point of view about the products and the industry. And that sort of makes people comfortable on the other side to hire you. If you can't take that half a step, then you're very risky because people think that, hey, you'll never like the products or you'll never do that. And for VMware, I think that was very important that everybody was expected to take that half a step, maybe sometimes 3/4 steps in the way, and they liked talking about the products. So that is one thing that worked for me. And then, as I was saying, that they required like a good mix of technical backgrounds or able to talk to, and everybody was technical in the company. Like at that time, Pat, he came from Intel. All of the CEO came from engineering. So that was a must. The second thing was on the business side, just being able to pick things which are strategic for the company. And the third one was hustle, just going very aggressively, meeting companies, building relationships. And they could see that because when I talked to them, I brought in a lot of companies saying, hey, we should talk to this company, we should talk to that company. And every time I used to go for an interview, I would have a different set of companies, and they saw that, hey, this guy's like really hustling.
Yeah, and listen to you, Pramod. What I see is as somebody who's you're formally educated. You've done a lot of schooling, and you were on your way to be a PhD as well. And yet, there's a lot of common sense things that you've come across. For example, it almost seems like trivial, but what you just described, for example, having that half a step. I've talked to recruiters. I've talked to a lot of people that are in this business, but yet it is such an effective suggestion to people looking for a job, and especially in this job market right now, to take that half a step. How do you do that, Pramod? How do you come out with these? Because these are unique. These are self-taught. You are self-taught, and you came out with these application of things that you experienced, but you learn from it, and you created something new in terms of being able to, for example, apply something. So you learn from specifically from the process of getting interviewed, what is going to make an effective interview. So how do you do that? How do you apply the formal education, the engineering background, and then you have the ability to take all of that and basically create almost like a new thought process, new means to be more successful?
Yeah, I think, again, another sort of advice for building relationship, networking, and also like for recruiting, right? I always feel like when you're going and meeting a person, you need to make that meeting worthwhile. You cannot just go there and sit there and say, hey, ask me questions, right? So that has been my agenda, like for the last 10 years since I moved on the business side, is always make every meeting worthwhile. And that's why I take that half a step. So if I'm meeting someone, I always look at their LinkedIn, look at what they've been doing. If they've been a founder or they're working in a company, I would go and learn about it. Where they are at in the funding, like product, read about their products. It really makes the conversation and the networking very worthwhile because you immediately put the other person at ease because now you're speaking the same language. And it doesn't take a lot, actually. Like a lot of times, like literally I have like 4 minutes before a meeting, but I quickly go about their profile, go about their company, read about it. Yeah, so that is something I think everybody should do if you want to build like a very meaningful relationship, is to take a bit of effort and be very genuine about it. Talk about one things, and mostly I focus on positive things like, hey, you're doing a good job here, like I heard about this, congrats on the funding. So just focus on the positives, but also like learn a bit more, and it goes a long way. Like I've seen like conversations where you just come in, the other person just doesn't know about you, and those conversations are just like weird, they don't go anywhere. So again, like I said, I think it doesn't take a lot of time actually. Literally, like sometimes I spend like just minutes before a meeting reading up, and it goes a long way.
Yeah, and it shows that it shows that you care, shows that you want to add value to this conversation, and you can only add value if you already done some homework, even if it's relatively speaking not a lot of effort. So and then last thing, we're still the thread of the initial conversation is what we describe as a journey. You also realize at some point that you have to create, and we're going off tangents here. I got a whole list of things that I've wanted to talk to you about, like just in general. And you talked about creating your own brand. And this is something you came to realization. And again, this is outside of your comfort zone. Somebody who's an engineer by profession, somebody who's very analytical, putting themselves out there, even doing what we're doing now, is not trivial. This is not something that and I'm sure this is all about getting out of your comfort zone. If you look at, for example, LinkedIn or other social media, there's only a fraction of the people that are creating content because they just don't know how to do it. They don't want to do it. It's outside of what they're used to. And so walk me through, there's a lot of people out there that want to do this, but yet they have almost like mental blocks, or they're thinking, okay, let's do it, but they never do. Or maybe it's a New Year's resolution and they never come to it. And you've done a really phenomenal job at building that brand. Even without meeting you first, I had an idea of who you are and what you stand for in terms of your own brand. And you've done this just by posting, by providing that content, providing value, and so on. So talk to me a bit about that journey for the past 3 years.
Yeah. So yeah, it used to be for me, like I was active on LinkedIn, but I never actually posted for a long time. I posted one article like in 2016, just one article a long time ago, but I not posted for a while. So one of the reasons I started posting is I used to do similar research when I was at VMware, and I would present that to our executives. So I was missing some of that. Like every few months, I would create a landscape, create a view of the land. So I was doing some of that, and I was just like, what do I do with it? So then I started posting online, and then I really saw like very good reception. So for people who are starting out, I think they worry a lot about quality. They worry a lot about reception. I think my advice is, so the thing that like really, if you look at some of the articles that have become popular and viral, are like a first party, like something that I have my own experience that nobody could have, right? So a lot of people, they will go and synthesize things that are out there, and that's not a lot of value if you do primarily like what I call as a second order analysis, not as a first order analysis. So I would recommend people to do that first order, and also be brave enough to share, be a bit vulnerable, share a bit like what you experience. And I would always say, stay on the positive side, never go on the negative side, never criticize or say anything. You could say something a little bit. My rule of thumb is 80-20. You say 80 good things and 20 one or two bad things. Bad things means things that you're critical about, you could be critical about, and it's human to be critical about something. If you like everything, you're not human, right? So it's okay to be critical about something, but focus on the positive things, focus on first party. Like people really like your own sort of point of view and your experience, rather than that's just like sharing some article. So I would say that would be my advice. And also stick to the subject that you really know the most. I think that is one thing that people struggle, is like, hey, I see an AI related or like a data related thing, let me go write an article about it. And then it ends up not being very useful because you're still a beginner. So most of the articles that I wrote initially were like, took years and years. So I was like, I wrote a whole series on identity, and I was working in that for 5 to 7 years. I knew that I wrote one on endpoint security, cloud security, all of them. I was working for 5+ years. I knew how the space evolved. So I would say go back into experiences, go back and see what you have seen and and write about it. I think one of my inspiration was this guy Dan Rose, who worked at Amazon and Facebook, and he writes a lot about on Twitter, and some of those threads are just epic because he just talks about like day to day, like, hey, today I went and talked to Mark Zuckerberg. Today I went and talked to Bezos. This is what we talked about. And there's so much like color and drama and learning in that. And it's such unique content. I would say like, I think people need to focus more on sort of their first party, their experiences rather than going and synthesizing something.
So Pramod, I wasn't planning to have this conversation about, but this is unscripted, so I love this. And let me ask you a couple more questions about specifically about that. So first, what if I don't have the opportunity to meet with Jeff Bezos on a regular basis, and maybe my life and my work life is not as interesting, or at least not as interesting as I would think. But I still want to write off like first person view. What do you recommend for somebody like that to do? Because again, some people listen to you say, listen, you're a successful entrepreneur, you're a venture capitalist, you work for Sun Microsystems, VMware, you have tremendous background, and you're exposed to a lot of exciting things. And therefore, it's maybe slightly easier for you to expose yourself and put some content out there that's interesting. But if I don't, and I either work for an enterprise or work for a company, and I have a fairly menial job that I do every day, what can I contribute?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So it talks a bit about my own transformation, right? So I was an engineer, and if I were to think about 10, 12 years about writing something, I would write about what code I'm developing, some architecture or something. And a lot of times you cannot disclose those, like those are like confidential, you're working on it, right? So there's not much to disclose. And if you're just doing an engineering job, you cannot say much about it. So yes, so I think it is a bit of the two things that you can do. And like one other thing that I did is like you just have to transform yourself into a role that you can have experiences, right? So one of the role that you will always have very good customer experience, very good experiences like when you're close to the customer, right? So if you're a product manager or in sales, you're meeting a lot of people. So you have a lot of stories and like a lot of details when you're meeting a lot of customers working on product, right? So that is one role you can get into. Again, if you're like in finance or something, it's again difficult. So there are some roles that it helps you get that content naturally versus you, or if you're in an executive role, you're talking to CEO and CEO, that also creates. But the other thing, I think you don't need to do that also. The other thing that you could do is similar to what I talked about, like having hobbies, do something on the side, right? For example, even if you're an engineer, you could you could start researching something. You should start looking something that is not your job, and that also something that you're more comfortable sort of sharing, right? And I've seen that seen some people do in the past is and you can talk about even like engineering leadership, like what does it take to be an engineering leader, and just go very much deep into it, where you put your own views, you interview other people, you talk to other people. So I think you just need to sort of pick something, but I think just go very deep and broad and create those experiences. For example, if you just write about your experiences, like that's like just one or two blog posts, right? But if you go and interview other folks, talk to other folks, then you can create more content. So I think content generation is also a chase, right? Either you are getting content very naturally because you are in that position where you are talking to customers, building products, building companies, and just being interesting, or you have to go create on your own.
Yeah, and I like that. I like the advice, and I think it doesn't really matter as long as you're passionate about something, and even if you don't necessarily have an exciting career, or at least you're not exposed to exciting day to day, there's still a lot of things that, even minuscule things that you are aware of, that potentially can create an impact, and you just have to start somewhere. And let me ask you this also. You mentioned specifically about being positive. So I was looking at some creators that said if you are controversial and there's a lot more people that are commenting depending on negative. So some, for example, somebody specifically made mistakes in how they pronounce certain names. So people would come in and correct them because the algorithm will say, okay, they don't differentiate between just being purposely correcting somebody and participation. So what's your take on that? You mentioned that the 80/20
Yeah, yeah.
rule applies here. It's part of being authentic, right? It's who you are. I think you are a very positive person, at least from our conversation, and that's who you are. That's why you write about positive things.
Yeah, I think to that point, I think the different social media is different. Like I think Twitter is very much the more negative, the more controversial you are, you can get hits and get viral, right? LinkedIn is, I would say, partly if you're just too positive, too bombastic and like marketing, people also tune you out. Like people want to see something genuine. I think what Twitter is very much like that, where there's a bunch of people on Twitter who just talking about negative things, they're hammering on everything, and they are very popular. I would say stay away from that because I think those people become popular, they get the views and the followers, but at the end of the day, if I think about it, none of them I would want to meet in person because they just show such negative energy. And I'm just like, and the good thing is they highlight all of the bad news. I'm like, okay, I'll follow them for that, but I would never want to hang out or have beer with this person. Yeah.
So what's the importance of, you mentioned specifically that it's very important to build your own brand. Specifically, Pramod, how does it help you? You already are in a position right now that I'm assuming you get a lot of connections, people reaching out to you, maybe potentially for advice, for insight, for being an advisor, maybe investing and so on. And you still do this. You still put yourself out there. How does it specifically help you? And what do you recommend for people that, again, wants to build their own brand in their pursuit of success?
Yeah, I think one thing that helps you, like you, same thing. I think if you have a brand, like if you work for a big VC firm, people know you and all of that stuff. I think what helps doing something on your own is also you add a different dimension to your personality, right? So people know you as, hey, you are an investor and so on. So firm, you invest in like infrastructure and all of that stuff. But what's another thing that I know about that person? Like what is something? So I think that is another reason to create your brand and showcase something is to show like a little bit different part of you. Like a lot of people, they're very very brand centric, so they will always publish the same stuff, they'll stick to it, it's very much scripted, but again it's very one dimensional. Like if you want to show another dimension, and particularly I think something you really like, you're passionate about, like you see people, some people are passionate about gardening and they're sharing a lot about that, or they are passionate about like food and all. I think it's very important to show like at least one or two dimensions, but again, same thing, like be authentic, like just don't do it for that. Like people need to really see the depth in that. So that is one thing. And the other thing that has helped me is really, so I think for me, the biggest advantage of doing this is like people just see me as a nice person, not like a asshole or like this, like a very marketing centric, just like a normal person, normal person who likes positive stuff and likes humor and all of that stuff. I think that has gone a long way because I think long term that helps you because people just say, hey, I know this guy, he's okay. I think to me, I think that's the ultimate goal is like, if people say he's okay, that's a win for me. Right? Otherwise, if you don't, I
And
mean,
Pramod,
that's another point. Yeah.
how important it is to match your brand and personality online and to who you are offline?
Yeah. So I think people who Yeah, just one minute.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So that is one thing. One thing is like when people meet me in person, I'm slightly different than my online personality. Like in person, I'm very calculated. I'm actually very calm, and people think that I'll see this clown who's very hyper and all of that stuff. They don't see that, but I think once people know me after one or two meetings, they see it's the same person. But I think first time if you meet, it totally looks different because a lot of people ask me, hey, is there somebody doing this content for you? Because you just look like a very serious person. And then I have to like literally show them like what I'm doing and all of that stuff. So to me, it's fine. I think having a bit of a different persona online is fine. Like you don't have to be the same person. But again, I'm authentic. Like I'm doing everything my own. It's okay to have two persona, and I think that's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because it's part of who you are. You can't. I think if you create your own content, you can't be consistent about it unless you're very authentic. I think eventually it will come out. It's very difficult to, I think, to maintain a certain persona for the long period of time, and it's very important. I think also people eventually they'll detect some sort of something's up, and I think that even the use of AI is becoming prolific in these posting, and it's becoming quite evident that AI wrote it, and people shy away from that. I think, and I think the tools is also creating this because LinkedIn has now an automatic response to it, so it gives you the highlights so people don't read it, and it provides you the ability to respond automatically. So it's like AI writing for AI, and we lose the human touch, the piece that we really like, because we are, as people, it's all about empathy, creating that personal connection online and versus as well as offline. And then if we don't have that, it's something that we shy away from. We don't want to connect. So listen, Pramod, I want to. We definitely going to do a, with your permission, a part B because I haven't even dived into the about technology, dive into deep. But this is a great intro to who you are. Let me ask you a couple questions, especially about the kind of the social presence and so on. What do you recommend for people reaching out to you or reaching out in general to venture capitalists and just the whole process of reaching out, initial reaching out, requesting, maybe initial meet, some consultation and so on. What's the best practices, something that makes you take and say, okay, this is a person I really want to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think the number one advice I give to founders is don't think of the VC thing as very tactical. A lot of founders are just like, hey, I want to raise money. I go and pitch this, and they give you money. Think of it as a relationship, right? So always approach from a relationship perspective where you talk about yourself, you ask the other person, you also like open-minded, hey, this is what I'm doing, what's your feedback? I think the more sort of you go into this as a relationship versus tactical, it's better. If you go in a tactical where people just talk about their company, they don't talk about themselves, they don't talk about where they came from, what they want to do, how they want to run a company. I think if you stay very tactical and say, I just want capital out of this conversation, I think that doesn't work. And I'll always think of this as a long-term thing. Like people, sometimes a lot of technical guys, they don't have the patience and perseverance, but also they also tend to exhaust themselves. That is another problem. Is you don't need to exhaust yourself. You don't need to come. A lot of times I see people just monologue walking through a 20 slide deck. I'm just like, you don't do that. Every slide, just take a breather, ask, do you have any questions? And you don't even have to go through 20 slide deck. You can go through 5 slides. I think the way to do this is to just be very open-minded and be very flexible. Don't think of this as a monologue. Like I have to go and like pitch every time. And then at the end of that, it's like a decision, like a 0 to 1. It's never like that. So my advice is always don't exhaust yourself. Don't do a monologue. Don't try to go and pitch. Like always, always ask for feedback. Always also read the body language. Is this person interested, or is this person just losing it? And that goes a long way, because at the end of the day, I think, see, the institutional venture capital is very different than angel or personal venture capital, because we are like fiduciaries. We are working for some other asset managers, right? So we have to be diligent, right? So a lot of times founders think that, hey, these guys have a potload of money. They just raised $100 million. So they're just doling out money. But I think it's so much difficult, because, again, like I said, it's like we have fiduciary duties, and also our careers depend on every investments we do. So we have to go through that. And also the human part is very important, like at the early stages, because you don't know this person, you don't know how this person will execute, you don't know what the person wants from you, right? So I always, and the thing is, you don't have to do that yourself. So a lot of times I encourage people to have somebody, like it's either a co-founder, or it could also be one of the first hire, like you could hire a marketing person or a product manager, and just bring all of those to the meeting. That way it becomes more of a discussion and not like a very stressful, okay, I'm going to pitch, I'm going to be perfect, and then I'm going to get like a check in the mail the next day.
Yeah. Pramod, let me ask you, and this conversation has been great. It's, I'm not asking easy questions sometimes. And let me ask you another uneasy question. Is like, I know what you're saying is true, and it's a great advice, Pramod. Like, I mean, to keep it natural, not necessarily focus on the things you have to deliver, and just think about the human element as well. But sometimes as maybe a first co-founder, first time raise, you are stressed out of your mind. You potentially maybe have a need to get funding right now, otherwise there's going nowhere. And then you're in this pursuit, ever going pursuit of trying to raise money, and you meet people over and over again. You feel like it's a Groundhog Day. How do you still maintain that every time you meet a VC? How do you maintain what you just described? Because it's sometimes very difficult. It's a meeting number 55,
Yeah.
yet another meeting, and you're getting into the zone. You're running through 20 slides, and you're so stressed. You just want to get to the finish line and see if something sticks. And it's very difficult. Even though what you said is absolutely true, in reality, it's not easy to execute.
Yeah, I think same thing. Like VCs are human, and as you mentioned, you're taking like, and also it's more of a top of funnel game. It's also a very inefficient thing. You take a lot of meetings, and a lot of times I think within the first 5 minutes, this is not going well, right? A lot of times this guy is not ready.
And
So I
Pramod,
would say,
sometimes
like,
it's a gut feel, right? Pramod,
yeah, and
you
I
just
think,
from your experience, right? You know.
yeah, and mostly people realize that within the first 5 minutes. Like to me, I always say like the first few slide is very important. If you cannot grab attention, like you just lost it. And a lot of people want to tell stories, they want to do their own thing, and I'm just like, look, you're doing this for the other person, not for you, right? So you need to do what grabs other person attention and not you. So a lot of people try to tell this story and all of that stuff, and they keep all the important stuff later, but then I've already lost interest, right? So I think coming back to like VCs, you're having a lot of meetings. So I always encourage people, and I like that, is to hustle. You had a meeting, you do at least like one or two follow-ups. After that, I think it doesn't make sense. But do one or two follow-ups. Hey, you had a meeting. Do you have any question? And just leave it at that, because people are busy. They sometimes don't get to it. And it's very important as a founder to follow up at least one time. I think you owe it to yourself. But if you follow up like second or third time, then you're just being unreasonable. But yeah, and
What
also the
about
other thing is also to make sure, I think this is one thing that a lot of founders miss, is to make sure the other person like is getting it right. Don't run through 5 slides and ask for questions. Like I would say, like maximum, like you shouldn't go more than 2 slides before just pausing and asking. I would like to do it every slide, but do at least 2 slides and then pause.
Is there a way to generate? So a lot of times it's like there's there's this idea that if you can create some sense of urgency, sense of fear, FOMO, fear of missing out with the VC, maybe because I know that's sometimes it's happened. Like VCs would not invest maybe in the first A round unless they already know that somebody else is invested. Maybe different with angel investors, but maybe potentially angel investors seed rounds are different. But is there a way for to really get attention from that perspective, or these tactics don't work?
I think they do work. Yeah, you need to create sort of a momentum where you get a term sheet, and then you cannot avoid people having a FOMO. And also, it's also like a social validation. Okay, somebody gave them a term sheet, somebody got so comfortable to give a term sheet. That says a lot, actually. And then if a big fund and a big guy gives a thing, it also says a lot. So that has been my advice to founders is don't try to sort of over optimize too much like valuation or something. Like always try to see how you can get that first term sheet, like how you can actually get this guy to get comfortable to write you a term sheet for some investment at some valuation. People get too much stressed out. Hey, I'm looking for like 25 million, 30 million. I'm looking for 5 million, 6 million. Not a time I tell, look, don't talk about the number, don't talk about the valuation, just talk about what you want to do. And also be flexible, saying that, hey, I have two different plans. What you want to do is you want to reduce all of the friction. Like all of this adds friction. If you talk about valuation, it adds friction. If you talk about or raise, it adds friction because people are like, if they have small fund, they're like, oh, we cannot fund this. So then they pass on it. So reduce all friction. What you want to do is you want to make sure the person makes a decision basically on merit. Like it's you, your business model, and nothing else. Is this something that they want to back?
Yeah, and speaking of you, and this is we're running out of time, so again, we're gonna do part B. I haven't even dived into the technologies and all. I have so many questions, but this has been great. Let me ask you, how important is the you piece of it, and how do you vet a person that you're potentially going to give out money for? What is it you like to see? What are some red flags? What makes you comfortable? What uncomfortable?
Yeah, so I think that has changed over the years. I used to have a different lens when I was at VMware, even different lens 2, 3 years ago. The lens I have is really company building. Do you want to build a company and not just a product? So company building is all the way from hiring the right people, like being very self-aware. Hey, I don't have the skills. Maybe I have this guys. So company building, like on the hiring. And the second thing, the most important thing that we look for is go to market. So it doesn't have to be somebody who is like very fluent in sales and able to sell anything. We just want somebody who is confident and very passionate about the product. They, like I joke about it. You see a dog and you should be able to pitch your product passionately. The dog is not going to buy it, but you still like pitch passionately, right? So if you are at an airport, you find somebody, they ask you what your company is. Again, you need to see that passion about the product and being able to just talk, right? A lot of people, they tend to be very tactical. Is this going to get me a sale or nothing? But you see the best founders, every time, like you meet them at a party, you meet them when you're drunk, you meet them, whatever, they're very passionate. They talk about it. They'll pitch you in the right way, saying, hey, this is what we do. This is all of that. I think I look for that a lot in terms of passion and communication. Like you should be able to just talk about your product. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially in the social setting, as you mentioned, to be able to provide valuable insight in a social setting to others. If you can't communicate what it is that you do and your let's say your value proposition, then who else will be able to actually do that? But Pramod Gosavi, thank you very much. Let's do a part B or part two of this conversation. I have a bunch of questions I'd like to dive into the market trends, technology. You're an engineer. I'd like to dive some of the like conversation about the maybe architecture, some things that you've seen. compliance, all kinds of things that are moving the market.
Yeah.
But we'll tell it some other time. But until then, for all those who are watching us today, what's the best way to interact with you, to reach out to you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm very active. Like I read all of the messages, so just send me a DM. Yeah.
And then specifically, what is you currently invested in? Maybe just an idea of, for people that reach out to you, what is your ideal contact?
Yeah. So I'm a generalist when it comes to infrastructure and SaaS. So I invest in anything sort of B2B enterprise software, but I'm spending a lot of time in data, AI, cybersecurity. We also do a little bit of fintech on the risk and fraud side. Yeah, those are the areas, like 4 areas that I'm spending time.
Fantastic. Pramod Gosavi, thank you very much. And for all those who joined, thank you for spending the time with us today. It's been a pleasure to having you, Pramod. I'm looking forward to having the next conversation. And until then, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. This was a very fun conversation.
Thank you very much.